another good QB story from today. I think it was in Tampa Bay. I think it was Tampa. Saints were on their way to beating the Bucks. Jameis tore his ACL. We've been seeing all kinds of cool rehab videos. So, of course, the Saints were in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes until they weren't. Now they've re-signed, or they're planning to re-sign Jameis Winston to a 2-year deal, base value of $28 million, including $21 million guaranteed. So he gets another chance to solidify himself for the long term. You know, his teammates love him. And if I may, it's another example of people moving on. It's another example of people moving on. Jameis Winston had a pass at Florida State. Still went number 1 overall. Yeah. He hasn't won anything big in the NFL. But more people talk about Jameis Winston's interceptions than they do his accusations in college. Just saying. You know, take that for whatever it's worth. Meanwhile, also in the NFC South, Falcons have a replacement for Matt Ryan. 2-year deal with Marcus Mariota, who is reunited with former Titans offensive coordinator Arthur Smith. So there's news regarding the number 1 and number 2 overall picks from the draft. What year was that? I lose track now. Was that 2016, 2015? What draft was that, Charles? The Jameis Mariota draft. What year was that? You there, Charles? We got you? There you go.
I don't know what happened there.
What year was that draft? The Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota draft. What year was that draft? Remember? On top of your head?
Oh my God!
I'll look it up. Anyway, I don't mean to.
Let's call
first
it
overall pick.
2015
draft. So number 1 and number 2 overall picks in the 2015 draft, both signed. Jameis re-signing with New Orleans. Marcus Mariota signing with Atlanta to replace Matt Ryan. Let's start there. Matt Ryan to the Colts. Michael and I, we talked about this, the continued power shift to the talent migration to the AFC. Can you tell us how that deal came about? We all know Atlanta was in the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes until they weren't. Quickly move on to take a $40 million cap hit to move Matt Ryan to Indianapolis and now get Marcus Mariota. What do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they knew when they got into the Watson talks, they knew it was time. They were ready to move on from Matt Ryan. I think they had already committed to it at that point. They slid back some money that was owed to them to give themselves a little bit of wiggle room. But I think what ultimately ended up happening was that Mariota was plan B. Like if Watson didn't ultimately work out, which they felt pretty good about, interestingly enough, into the last day until really it boiled down to the money with Deshaun Watson. I think at that point they knew they were going to ultimately have to go with plan B. Plus, Indianapolis, I know there was a lot of talk about Indianapolis being in on Baker, and I never kind of felt like that was as legitimate as clearly Baker had strong interest in Indianapolis, but from what I understood, the organization wanted a veteran who could come in, who had a track record for being very professional, was going to be reliable. They maybe sort of like the Phillip Rivers experience, but definitely a bridge situation that was going to give them a year, maybe 2 years of breathing room to find their next quarterback. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I did hear, what attracted them very much to Matt Ryan was that they felt like there was an aspect of Carson Wentz where he was not putting the organization first at times. And everything they had heard about Matt Ryan was he was always an organization first kind of guy, a great teammate, all these different things. So it kind of felt like another diss at Carson Wentz. And by the way, Washington probably overspent going and getting Carson Wentz, given what Matt Ryan gets moved
probably moved a little too quick. Yeah, probably just got a little too over. That money those picks were burning a hole in their pocket. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, Charles, you think about Baker Mayfield. He's the first quarterback in 26 years to win a playoff game in Cleveland. And so if you had stopped this conversation in January of 2021, I think a lot of Browns fans would be like, yeah, Baker Mayfield. And it seemed like Kevin Stefanski and Mayfield, they kind of had a synergy, and Mayfield had calmed down a bit. Where was that? Where was the love lost? And where does Baker go from here?
Well, remember, they could have done the contract extension they did. Okay, so it's always, you have to keep in mind that they were coming off of a playoff win. They had a great season. Everybody was happy. Everyone was excited. everyone assumed contract's going to get done prior to the 2021 season. The fact that it didn't automatically should tell you there was some reticence on the part of the Cleveland Browns and the long-term commitment to Baker. They wanted to see something else. We talked about on this show repeatedly, they wanted another year of information. And I think once the season started and the shoulder injury occurred, there was we know we're going to have to go to year 5 because this is up year, down year, up year, down year. There's not consistency here. But then I think after the shoulder injury occurred, Baker was very public with what had happened, like that his shoulder was injured. And I think inside the organization, they're like, wait a minute, like, is this from a leadership standpoint, how do we feel about this? How do we feel about the fact that he's basically out there giving himself cover for what might go wrong in the future? I'm playing hurt. And in their minds too, in the organization, they're like, well, maybe you should sit down. Like maybe you need to sit down and we need to put someone else in there. If you're not going to be healthy and this is going to hinder you and you really feel like you can't go out there and play at your best, maybe we need to be able to put you on the bench. They knew they couldn't do that would become a very big issue with Baker and it would become a very public issue. And then as things moved on, he started to say some things about, his play and not being healthy. And they were definitely pushing that. But internally, when they're looking at how he's playing, they're saying, wait, there are things that are showing up here that should not be tied to a shoulder injury. There are decision-making things happening here. There's processing things happening here. And they just became more and more troubled by that. And I think by midseason, they knew, or as they approached, not even midseason, they were approaching really the trade deadline. They're like, we have to start to look at potential other options because this could be going as sideways as it could. And we need to have another quarterback lined up if we can get our hands on an elite quarterback. And Deshaun Watson was one of the guys that they were looking at the trade deadline.
You said that a long time ago. I think you told us that around the trade deadline, I want to say. So second part of that was, what's the market for him? Like,
where's he going?
Go Indianapolis is where, Indianapolis is where he wanted to go, reportedly.
Well, the problem with Carolina is Baker and Sam Darnold both have the same fifth-year option. So they're both on the books for $18.8 million plus. Okay, so that's a salary stack of two guys. So you're sort of like, okay, we're resolving this. Now we're spending 30.
Just let them duke it out. Just be like Heath Ledger and the Joker. We're having tryouts. Just break a pool stick and be like, make it fast.
I mean, but I think the question is, I think for the Panthers, they sat there and said, when Sam Darnold was protected, when he had time, when in ideal conditions, he looked a lot better than when he didn't. But they see the same thing with Baker. When Baker's protected, he looks like X. If he's not, he looks like Y. There's a pretty dramatic difference. So I think in the minds of the Panthers, they're like, is this the same guy? Like, are we we just dealing for the Spider-Man meme where it's two Spider-Mans pointing at each other? I mean, it's so that's a problem. I think Seattle, though, what's interesting about Seattle is they like Drew Lock. I don't know that they're like, hey, let's just go out there and start Drew Lock. They want to see what he's got. They'd love to see him compete with someone. And I think John Schneider is the kind of guy that leans into some of Baker Mayfield's attributes. He likes guys that are a little cocky. He likes guys that got some sand to them. He likes guys who feel like they're always, the world's always betting against them. So there are certain aspects of Baker that I think make sense with a Seattle pursuit. There's really nowhere. I mean, I don't know where else he goes at this point. I think there's a chance it could become, as unthinkable as this might be, it could become a Ryan Tannehill situation where, remember, the Tennessee Titans brought in Ryan Tannehill because they had Marcus Mariota, and they're like, well, I don't know. We need another option here just in case. Mm-hmm. If it's not Seattle and it's not Carolina, it's going to be a team that doesn't really have. They need like another option, another plan B just in case, and he might not go in there as the presumed starter.
Okay. And everything you spoke to about the organization's feelings about Baker Mayfield kind of speaks to the conversation Michael and I were having earlier about what the Chris Mortensen report, they wanted an adult in the room, really meant from a football standpoint. Talking about leadership, not your personal life, but leadership within the facility. And I only bring that up to ask you about the Deshaun Watson trade. We talked a lot about the optics and how Deshaun Watson getting richer to the tune of $230 million guaranteed, $45 million signing bonus, but only $1 million in salary in 2022 to guard against a suspension. Him getting richer was very poor optically. And I'd also point out, this is from The Athletic, Michael. I meant to mention this to you earlier. And Charles, you could probably speak to this as well. When word got out that he was going to Cleveland and the contract details emerged, one team called and asked why it wasn't given an opportunity to match, because they insisted they would have. So my point is, if Cleveland had not done this, somebody else would have had this issue. Having said that, Deshaun Watson's baggage is now Cleveland's problem. From what you know, Charles, what is Cleveland's PR plan? Football-wise, they're all set, suspension notwithstanding. What's their PR plan to mitigate the backlash that they're giving from, maybe it's a vocal minority, but a pretty loud one nonetheless?
Right. I expect it's going to be a unified voice type of thing where it's like, look, we don't want 5 different people talking about what we did here or what the plan is here, how we went about it. I think it's going to be, I don't know who they have chosen yet, but I think it will be streamlined either through Andrew Berry, the general manager, or through Kevin Stefanski, or they will decide, look, it'll be Jimmy who addresses this, and Andrew and Kevin will say, look, it's an organizational thing. Jimmy and Dee Haslam are going to address this. I don't think they're going to get away with that. I really do think that Andrew Berry is going to have to answer tough questions. Kevin Stefanski is going to have to answer tough questions. There's going to be the what made you comfortable question. There's going to be the why was the contract structured this way, to seemingly protect Deshaun against the financial penalty of a suspension if it were to happen in 2022. I don't know yet. We're going to find out at the owners' meetings. I'm going to head to Palm Beach. I'm very interested to see how Kevin Stefanski deals with these questions, how Jimmy Haslam deals and Dee Haslam deal with these questions, and then Andrew Berry as well. That's where we're going to find out specifically.
What do you think?
Do you think
they meet with the local media before then? Because the owners' meetings are what, this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, or end of this week, or?
So I'm flying out Saturday, so they really don't start until Sunday. So Sunday is sort of when the rubber meets the road.
So you don't think that sometime this week there's a Deshaun Watson podium, owner on one side, general manager on the other one, and you don't see that kind of scene in Cleveland?
We'll see. Let me put it this way, I'll be a little surprised if that happens before the owners meeting.
See, but that doesn't that make it worse though? Like, doesn't that speak to, like, you realize that there's an issue here? Don't you have to meet it head on as an organization?
Well, I mean, I think part.
Yeah, how do you meet it head on though? Without him, without Deshaun.
Well, exactly.
No, but you bring him there, right? You bring him there and you sit him down because it. You shouldn't have made the trade.
Well, if Deshaun starts to get asked questions about the civil suits, he's going to say they were still in the process of litigation, so I can't talk about really anything regarding that. So he can't answer any questions about guilt or innocence, or essentially what I think he will ever be available to say until there's some resolution is what he has already said following the grand jury, the lack of an indictment from a grand jury, which is, I want him, I'm paraphrasing here, but he wants to get on with repairing his image and who he is and reclaiming that or whatever. And that's pretty much it. But there's not going to be a lot of ability to,
it's not going to be a deposition.
Right. Yeah. There's not going to be a lot of probing.
But I just don't know how organization, I get what he can't say, but you got to let him say that he can't say it. I don't know how an organization can go all in on a player like this and then try to keep him from the local media. Because the longer you keep him from the local media, the more Mary Kay Cabot and Terry Pluto and all the people that Michael just mentioned earlier are writing about all the the backlash that they're getting. You got to put him out there, don't you? And take it, weather the storm.
Organizationally, that's every organization is going to have a different plan. I understand what you're saying. Like, it makes sense to me that you don't, quote unquote, hide him from the media, but it's it is certainly not a situation where it was make the trade, he's on a podium a day later. It's let's get him in here, let's spend some time with him and make sure that everybody who's going to be up on the stage, sitting with him, and I would assume that that's how you would want to do it. if you're going to stand by him, you're going to sit by him, right? Like that's my thought process.
Well put. That's exactly right.
Yeah, just don't put him up there by himself. You've taken this on. You better be up there, sitting beside him, saying we're handling this all together.
You gotta sleep in it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so, but I do think that there's going to be an element of, let's make sure we get on the same page again. Let's talk about this. Here's what's coming. Let's go through this together. I could see it happening before. I could see it before, obviously, practices. I guess I just think there's a chance that this happens after the owners' meetings. Although Kevin Stefanski's going to have breakfast with the media, Jimmy Haslam's going to be approached at the owners' meetings, Andrew Berry's going to be approached, and so it would behoove them to answer the questions before they get there. Like let's do it all at once. Let's sit down and do this at one moment. I just know we're waiting to see when that's going to be put on the books at this.
Charles, I think you're right, and I just want to point out. I know it probably wasn't intentional, but it was amusing to me, and I don't know if that's the right word given the gravity of what we're talking about. But it was amusing to me when Kevin Stefanski's statement on this deal. He says Andrew and his staff. I always pay attention to who's named in statements. So it's Kevin Stefanski's statement. I'm sure Andrew and his staff. No, not my staff. Andrew and his, really did their homework. It's their decision, not mine. Now, it probably wasn't intentional, but that was the only name mentioned in that statement. But that's not what I want to ask you. I want to ask you, and this is speculation. We don't know the answer. Mike asked me earlier, hey, what will it take to move on? Do you think people will move on? Is it one Super Bowl appearance? Is it a Super Bowl appearance? Is it a Super Bowl victory? For people in Cleveland to say, for the majority of people to say, hey, that's our quarterback, we're excited, that was the past, now we're going forward with our quarterback of the future. What do you think it will take to get 95, 98% of the fan base to get to that point?
Well, Dawn's, she's from Ohio, okay? She lived in Cleveland. Her brother's from Cleveland. And I can tell you they're split. It's kind of interesting because you can sort of get to see, Dawn's I don't know how to feel about this, and she loves the Browns. And she's like, I really don't know how to feel about this. I don't know how to feel about the team, the leadership, this acquisition. She lives here in Houston, obviously with me, and we've seen all the Deshaun stuff up close. Her brother's different though. He cares about the football. He roots for the laundry. And he's, so he's like, I want to, he focuses on the fact that he's a great quarterback and he's excited to have a great quarterback for the first time in his lifetime. Well, at least since Bernie Kosar, he feels like to cheer for. So it's going to be a wide array of how fans absorb this in terms of them all getting, on board together. I don't know that there's any template, that repeats itself. I can only say that, remember, Kobe Bryant had a past. May he rest in peace. Right. He had a past. Okay. And I know it's hard for people to hear. And I know that, people now, I know there are a lot of people who don't like to bring that up, but he moved beyond things that occurred in his past that were not flattering. Ben Roethlisberger. I watched Ben Roethlisberger showcased on ESPN, walking around the stadium, slapping hands, all these different things. He had a past that was not flattering. Okay. And people found a way to move on. Not everybody did. Okay. Michael Vick, okay, had a past, paid his debt to society. He's on TV now. I still see people who are like, I don't care what he's done with Humane Society. I don't care. The PSAs, I don't care that he's spoken out. They will never be over it. Okay. And that's fine. I think everybody's just got to handle it the way they got to handle it. The one thing I will say about Deshaun, though, two things are going to play into this. One, what happens on the football field and success will absolutely shape how some people look at him and the grace they're willing to give. Okay. But there is still a legal aspect of this that's playing out, and we don't know what's going to happen with those civil suits. There is a chance, albeit unlikely, that all 22 of those civil suits see the inside of a courtroom, and both Deshaun and the alleged victims have their day to speak their mind, and what comes out comes out. Another thing, too, that I think some fans might need to grapple with, and maybe even Deshaun, there's nothing in the CBA that says the NFL has to wrap up its investigation in 2022. Okay? Nothing. Yeah. So they can protect whatever they want to protect in 2022. The first day of the league year in 2023, the league can go, yep, we did our due diligence. We talked to everybody. We took our time parsing the facts. And we have decided now, day one of 2023, when he has $46 million in guaranteed salary, now we're going to make our decision.
Or they could fine him. Or they could fine him. They could suspend him in 2022 and fine him if they want to as well.
Now that one right there is really interesting. It was interesting. I was talking to a GM last night about this, and he was sort of going through the paces, and he was like, don't you think the league should invalidate this contract because it clearly appears to be a chess move against potential punitive measures, and can we allow that? Why would anyone be allowed to do that? And I said, well, I kind of took him through Reuben Foster. And I remember when Reuben Foster, he was not suspended for games. After he was cut by the 49ers, he ends up with Washington. They fined him. But the question is, like, at what point is the fining precedent? Like, what if the league comes out and says, we're fining him $20 million? Like, what if they say we're going to suspend him and fine him $15 million? All I can say is at that point, and really any point, the union is going to step in and go, wait a minute here. Now we're gonna fight. There's gonna be a knockdown drag out over this. So it is quite a mess still ahead. Yeah. And the Cleveland Browns had to have understood what they were getting, what they were bringing on here. Okay, there was nothing in their minds where they were like, well, this is hitting us by surprise. No, they had to have known everything that was coming. And by the way, everyone needs to be heard. So the people want to ask the questions about, did you talk to any of the victims, alleged victims? Yeah. Did you talk to the opposing attorney, the plaintiff's attorney? All these different things. They deserve every question they get at this point, okay? And they had to know that was coming, and that's all part of this. And everybody put on their grown-up pants and deal with it. And last thing, I know I'm being long-winded here. One other thing, I would stop talking about evaluations of Baker Mayfield at all. Character, anything. Just let it go, because the backdrop now is Deshaun Watson. So if you want to talk behind the scenes about Baker's character, people are going to ask you then, well, what made you comfortable with Deshaun then? Answer both questions then.
And there are certain people that's just never going to be comfortable. And a lot of things Michael and I hit on today and Friday when it broke. Great. Because even if he goes to trial and wins it, there are still going to be people that's going to believe that he's just another rich and powerful guy that got off because he got money, and we're a society that puts alleged victims on trial as much as we do alleged perpetrators. That's one. Two, reportedly they spent more time in the meeting with Deshaun talking football than they did about these 22 cases. Three, as I said to Michael earlier, when you've been through 32 quarterbacks since 99, that trumps 22 sexual assault cases if you're the Cleveland Browns. That's just the unfortunate reality of the situation. But four, I have a programming recommendation for you. I think one of your next guests on You Pod to Win the Game should be Dawn and her brother. That would be a fascinating conversation to listen to. Just wanted to throw that out there when you mentioned Dawn's.
That would be pretty interesting.
Last football question I have for you, and then we're going to do something that we'd be remiss if you and I in particular did not do, Charles, before we let you go. What is the Packers' plan at wide receiver?
Well, okay. I think they were going to make an addition at the position prior to what happened with Davante Adams. There was a plan to potentially seek a trade partner for a veteran, or if the free agency market fell the right way and there was an economical sort of option. But then, Adams clearly, I think Aaron Rodgers, from what I understand, Aaron Rodgers, it's true, all these reports have come out and said like he knew before he signed his deal. But I think I'd be interested to know whether there was a sense of optimism on Aaron's part that, hey, they'll work this out. Somehow we will figure this out and Davante Adams will remain here. And then it didn't happen. And as far as the plan, I think that they are definitely looking at potentially a trade partner and a veteran wide receiver. The question is, though, who's going to be available? Like, is DK Metcalf going to be made available by the Seattle Seahawks? And I think they don't know that until they resolve their quarterback position. So I think that they will look at that. There's definitely going to be a player drafted at the position. I don't think there's any question about that. But I think if you asked me to put percentages on it, I think Green Bay at some point, leading into the draft or maybe during the draft will attempt to acquire a veteran wide receiver off of another NFL team.
2 firsts and 2 seconds in a deep draft for wide receivers. They might be able to get one of these instant impact rookies. All right, before we go, Charles, as somebody who is one of the best in the NFL at covering this league, you're a top 2 NFL analyst, and you are not 2 Charles Robinson, as far as we're concerned.
Okay.
The best in the business at covering this league. I used to do that once upon a time. Both of us crossed paths with John Clayton. I used to call him a colleague once upon a time.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get your reflections on John. One of the nicest and most pleasant men I knew. The SportsCenter commercial was so good because most people never saw him from the waist down. I only saw him a few times from the waist down. Usually I shared a split screen with John Clayton. But always just such a pleasant and nice guy. I didn't spend a whole lot of time with him, but I always appreciated the time that I spent with him. He was somebody who inspired me as well. Those Inside the Huddle segments made me want to do this, made me want to gather NFL news, notes, and nuggets. He was a football guy through and through. Just your reflections on John before we let you go.
I remember, it was weird that I remember this, but I was a young guy. I just had started the national beat for Yahoo. And one of the first times I ever saw him, he called me C-Rob. And I was like, wait, I don't even know this guy. I'm like, how does he know that people call me this or whatever? And he said, no, that seems like a good nickname. And it just felt like a really nice, engaging moment with someone who was huge, like see him on TV. Yeah. He was covering the league. Like he was the professor. Like
he was a rock star.
Yeah, he
was the Slayer. He was legit a rock star.
He really was. And another thing too that I remembered about John was I think I lacked this ability, and it drives me crazy, and I wish I could refine it. He had an ability to talk to like anybody, whether it was Belichick, Pete Carroll, like some really intense characters, and ask them really tough questions. But the way that he did it, I've seen Ed Werder do it too with Jerry before, where Ed will ask Jerry questions and I'll be like, oh man, okay, that's a fastball. John could throw like a fastball that you didn't feel like a fastball, kind of because it was like John asking it. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about him, is sometimes you would sort of be in a group setting with him and he would ask someone, I'm kind of like, let me figure out how I can, I'm like trying to navigate how to get the question in without blowing up this group. And you would just ask it. And I always really appreciated that about John. And like I said, I tweeted this, that I almost never would see him and depart without being like, bro, I watched that SportsCenter commercial at least once a year, if not multiple times a year, and I laugh every single time.
Every single time.
The funniest one I've ever seen.
Every single time.
He will be missed.
And he will be universally respected,
man.
Great. And did a lot for
Charles,
the business. So.
Yeah, what you said about him is so interesting. Peter King described him as a metronome, and that's it. He said, I never saw John angry, I never saw him tired, I never saw him, frazzled. He was just kind of the same, just like a really eager, intense football guy, but fun, a happy football chronicler.
I'll give you one last real quick thing that nobody knows. This is the first time I'm ever telling anybody this. His last AP ballot for the votes, so MVP and all these things, he accidentally hit reply all and sent it to everybody in the group. And so and then he was like, I was like, John, you sent your AP ballot to everybody. And he's like, oh no. He's like, how do I get that back? I'm like, you can't get it back. We all have your ballot in front of us right now. It's just funny because we all kind of guard, who we're voting for, and he accidentally sent the entire group.
I'll tell you what, man. I haven't talked to him in years, unfortunately, but it was a career highlight. Like the first time I shared a set or a screen with John Clayton, I was like, yeah, because at that time you got to remember it was Mort, me, John Clayton, and Lynn Pasquarelli. This is before we had everybody on every team. This was Mort, me, Clayton, and John Pasquarelli. So I'm up there with John Clayton. I'm like, yo, I better bring it. Dude,
his eye connection. Do you remember his eye connection? He would, when he looked at you, like it was like he didn't blink. He was like looking into your soul. When he would look at you and talk to you, I'd be like, John would never blink, man. Like, this is intense. Like, he is like, he had that grin. He always had a grin. Yeah. And he would look like into your soul when he would be talking to you. And I'm like, trying to. Man.
All right, man. Well, hey, keep up the great work, Charles. We'll talk to you later. Thank you, brother.
I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Take
Charles.
care.
Hey, thanks for watching Brother from Another on YouTube. Make sure you hit subscribe before you leave, and be sure to watch us 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock. Appreciate you.